Okay, we're going to start. Welcome everybody to the CDN Alliance launch event. Welcome everybody to that is joining. I still see people coming in, but we're going to start anyway because we have a tight schedule, we have a big schedule of presentations. What we're going to do today is a couple of different sessions. We have four guest speakers. We have Alex Davies from ReThink Research about decentralized CDN. Then I will talk a little bit about the CDN Alliance and why we actually started. And then we will, Stephan Schröder will tell a little bit about the impact of network handovers, content delivery, followed by Adam Curwin on the sustainability of CDNs. And last but not least, we have a session, an interview actually on the depth of change, together with the CEO of Deliver. Unfortunately, nice people at work had to cancel because of not being available of Graham Harris, but we got the CEO of Deliver instead. So we're going to do an interview with him about the same topic. Alex Davies, are you there?
Yes, hopefully.
Perfect.
There we go. Cool. Right, video's on.
Yes, so for everybody, we're recording this session. If you have any questions in the meantime during the sessions, feel free to submit those in the Q&A. And we'll try to answer those during the session. Otherwise, we'll try to answer those after the session. And I would like to give the word now to Alex and tell a little bit about the decentralized CDN.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So, share screen. In case anyone has spotted it, I'm actually doing this from my car because traffic and breakdowns. So we've been slightly sabotaged, but hopefully this goes off without a hitch. So I'm sharing my screen now. All good?
Yes.
Lovely. Great stuff. Okay. So decentralized CDN, fact or fiction. I'm going to stop my video. So this is essentially, this is ReThink TV's latest forecast. Last year we looked at multi-CDN, and this year we wanted to examine decentralized CDN. And the sort of topic here is this a fact or is this fiction? And if I can jump forward, yep. So definitions, we've got public CDN, and for the purpose of our forecast, we're only interested in video workloads. So public CDN is a multi-tenant CDN where CDN traffic is from lots of users all essentially sharing one big pipe. Of course, it's not a pipe, it's a very complicated network, but everyone is on the same thing. So private CDN, this is a single tenant CDN where the CDN traffic is dedicated for one user. So all that bandwidth, just one user, smaller pipes. And this, of course, is where these sort of CDN reseller services exist. A multi-CDN deployment or a multi-CDN user is when we have a user that is using more than one type of CDN. So if they're using public and private, if they're using two public, if they're using two private, all of that falls under the multi-CDN umbrella. And that is becoming increasingly common and will be essentially standard practice sort of 2026 time. We were also last year looking at pure WebRTC, and this is a alternative to either public or private CDN, which would be using WebRTC as the sort of video delivery mechanism, rather than your sort of dedicated CDN infrastructure. So we were examining, what percentage of total video traffic would be driven using a pure WebRTC service. And then this year we wanted to examine decentralized CDN. So this often crops up in the same sort of discussions as P2P, peer-to-peer. And last year we sort of relegated it, and this year we thought we'd try and mark it out ourselves. And it's an emerging sort of alternative option. It's reliant on distributed nodes that are usually, currently at least, incentivized via cryptocurrency, which of course sets off a lot of alarm bells. And the key here is that we're relying on third-party infrastructure. So instead of like one big provider controlling that network end to end, that provider, that system becomes essentially a marketplace, or it's just a way for them to fill out their, flesh out and expand and increase the effectiveness of the CDN. And with the decentralized CDN, this third-party infrastructure, it will begin supporting VOD workloads. And when it's at sufficient scale, you can do live video. So the sort of takeaways from our report is that DCDN begins to emerge at the end of the period, but of course it still pales in comparison to the conventional CDN market. The incumbent CDN providers should already be monitoring how DCDN technologies will handle these sort of video workloads. And as live comes to the fore, they have to pay particular attention to the sort of trade-offs that they see there. And then the DCDN is part of the wider Web 3.0 trend, which I'll explain in a minute. But we're moving from centralized cloud computing workloads into this distributed cloud computing and edge compute and AI and all this stuff. Like that is part of this wider trend. So CDNs will they'll follow suit. So just to reiterate, DCDN is still a minnow, but it's this chance for new video streaming services to emerge, and because of the functions of the technology, it's a way for them to remain independent and enjoy very low delivery costs. And the sort of to put some volume to this, it's 115 exabytes of data in 2026, and the initial focus is on video streaming services, but later on, I think they begin to encroach into our kind of traditional, other CDN functions. So this is just a little highlight. Web 1.0, text, eventually graphics. It was being served from on-premises machines and eventually on-premises data centers. In this sort of category, we evolved from text and graphics to eventually images and other bits of sort of low volume data. And it was a low volume of users. So Web 2.0, that's the arrival of video and mobile broadband. And thanks to Web 2.0 technologies, I'm presenting this from my car. So this is, of course, facilitated by cloud computing platforms and all the sort of vendors that came to the fore, and the mobile network operators who initially promised that 3G was going to, be the driver of video calling. I think we all remember that was a fairly kind of bumpy arrival. And of course, Web 2.0, the volume of users was far larger than 1.0. So finally, Web 3.0, that's the arrival of decentralized cloud computing platforms and vendors. It's a way to essentially create a marketplace for workloads. And if all goes to plan, this is a sort of optimized and orchestrated and distributed across all the sort of available hardware that's out there. This, I think, will come up later on in the CDN Alliance presentation, but there's a lot of environmental benefits here from being able to use the sort of idle capacity that's already been deployed, particularly stuff that is closer to end users. And speaking of users, Web 3.0 will see the arrival of 2 to 3 billion more web users, and they are not going to follow the same sort of adoption curves that we've seen in the West and sort of the developed economies. They're going to go straight to mobile and straight to video, and there'll be this sort of very large opportunity, I think, for the CDN technologies there. So the B word, I think a lot of you will have heard cryptocurrency and gone, oh no, blockchain and Bitcoin. And the key part here is that the current approach relies on blockchain technologies to create trust. So in the sort of cryptocurrency world, you're trying to operate in a trustless environment where everyone's out to try and betray you. So in our CDN functions, the blockchain elements are there to act as a way to keep a ledger of transactions of who did what, who should get paid what video got delivered where. So the cryptocurrency element it's not necessary. You can use blockchains with traditional currencies. There's a lot of opportunity for the likes of Microsoft Azure to start charging for things via some sort of blockchain-based ledger. But in the background, any startup that's coming into this space is going to have to deal with a bunch of venture capitalists who've had their fingers burnt already. However, you just have to skim a few headlines. You can see that the enthusiasm for this sort of technology is still massive, but they have to be sort of wary of rubbing investors up the wrong way. So you don't really need the blockchain stuff, but it's a great tool for this particular sort of job at the moment. And the blockchain is the behind the scenes sort of stuff that's doing the accounts and users and keeping track of entries in the ledger effectively. But the actual video delivery at the moment, heavily WebRTC. So you're not actually using blockchains to deliver video. Most people take a very dim view of that. There are a couple of holdouts who are adamant that you could use an actual blockchain to stream video, but it's a bit weird. So this is a bit of context. The graph on the left is internet traffic by region, and here you're just seeing that it's increasingly trending upwards. This is moving from about 3,156 exabytes in 2021 up to 12,813 in 2026. That is about a 30% compound annual growth rate. And for video traffic, as a sort of percentage, it shifts from about 69% to 77% of the total by the end of the period. So this is the background. We already saw that the existing CDN infrastructure sort of buckled when we had the sort of height of the pandemic and lockdowns. So it's worth bearing in mind that even though these curves are just trending upwards, it's not smooth sailing. There's some frantic paddling of those duck feet below the surface of the water. And this is the multi-CDN shift. I appreciate this background's a bit light, but that grey line at the bottom, that's pure WebRTC. So you're seeing it as a sort of a fraction of the others, but it is growing stronger than the others. So our kind of view from the multi-CDN perspective is that public CDN, it's still important, but multi-tenant becomes less attractive. Private CDN is driven by demand in emerging markets, so predominantly Latin America and APAC, where the public CDN offerings are less mature, so it's easier and more viable to go with a private CDN approach. And by that sort of track, pure WebRTC, it becomes a viable alternative to both private and public CDN, and it's more attractive in those developing markets because of the lower sort of price points. And the sort of total growth keeps growing until Web 3.0 properly arrives. But I mean, that point is 15, 20 years down the line, really. So this is our CDN revenue global. And again, this is just for the video slice of it. 8.45 billion in 2021, up to 36.49, CAGR of around 25%. Private CDN is more resilient on the pricing front. And we can see that pure WebRTC has an uptick at the end, and that's due to the sort of the arrival of live video consumption sort of at scale down the line. And with that, hopefully I've kind of set the stage. And here we have decentralized CDN, and you'll note that these graphs look very different to the others. These are more like our kind of exponential curves. And again, this is 115 exabytes. So it's a fraction of total CDN traffic. But you will see in the graph on the right that the non-live, which is that orange line, was tracking ahead of live. But from 2025, we would expect that's when the sufficient volume of nodes kicks in, and that's when properly streaming live video across DCDN is viable. So that happens towards the end of the period. You need enough nodes in place, and it's just going to take time. And because we see this in sort of AVOD and what we were calling long form social media and gaming, live video becomes more and more important. There's a sort of proliferation of available sources. So we shift to live as the sort of primary driver. But conversely, you go from having 5 TV channels that are broadcast terrestrially. We've gone from that dynamic into having thousands of TV channels and hundreds of thousands of available sort of live streams, millions depending how you count it. So in terms of CDN workloads, that's another sort of factor that I think is in favor of DCDN. So there is on the left, that's our exponential curve, that's total video traffic. And the graph on the right, there's our context. So this is by the end of the period, 1.3% of total traffic. And you would be forgiven for thinking that the blue line, which is DCDN, is just the horizontal axis in this graph. So yeah, it is fact, it exists. There are sort of DCDN supported services that you can go and watch today. It does work, it should scale, and CDN providers should already be investigating these systems. There's been a few notable experiments in the past with P2P, and I think not that anyone wants to tell you on the record, but maybe get a few points down them at IBC, and some of these ugly truths might come bubbling out. But these systems exist, and you only really need one to sort of take off, and you end up with a fairly sort of significant amount of video traffic across the networks. So the fiction side of this, it's not significant within our 2021 to 2026 timeframe, based on our investigation. But our customers were like very interested in the topic, so we wanted to make sure we could address it. And this is the background. So like we spent a lot of time looking at pay TV, and on the left you're seeing these sort of households, and you can see that broadband homes in green passes the pay TV households 2020. Like that's already happened. And the graph on the right is our breakdown by region. But pay TV households are just declining through the period. People are still watching more and more video, so obviously they're watching it from somewhere, and we need to be able to deliver it. So this is just the methodology. We speak to a lot of people, basically. It's not that interesting. But yeah, lots of off-the-record discussions, and then those get applied to sort of data we collect. This is us, of course, so ReThink Technology Research. My contact details are there if you want to reach out and chew the fat afterwards. And it was ReThink TV is the service. And I think here we'll go to audience questions. So I'm going to put my video back on. Hopefully, there we go. Mark, are you jumping back on? Shall I stop screen sharing?
Yeah, just up the screen share, that's fine.
Lovely, right, stop share, there we are.
Good. I got one question in here from the audience. So the question is here: what are the video-centric multi-CDN options in the marketplace? Are they compatible with decentralized CDNs? So is there already a relationship between DCDN and multi-CDN? Did you have any?
Yes, there's not at a commercial scale, but by our sort of definition, like our view of it is that in the very early days, you would have turned to a public CDN provider if you're a streaming video service. The next evolution is commissioning a private CDN, and whether that's licensing software and doing it yourself, or it's going to a dedicated service provider who will create a private CDN for you, or if it's buying capacity from a CDN reseller, you will have moved to a multi CDN choice, and then within the period you'll start seeing the sales pitches for using a decentralized system as a way to not spin up another private or public CDN. And then by the same token, we'll start to see the incumbent CDN providers use some of these DCDN technologies in pilot projects as a way to test and support with new customers. So it's not really an either or. It's more of a complementary choice.
In addition to what's already there, basically.
Yeah. So it's not so much that every new DCDN deployment comes at the expense of a multi CDN. It's more just that it's an alternative way to deliver video, and it makes a lot of commercial sense in very sort of price sensitive markets. And similarly, those price sensitive markets like in Latin America and MENA, you can't piggyback on all of the sort of existing enterprise and corporate and telco infrastructure that's been deployed. It's not the same, and I don't think we'll see things like multiple AWS centers deployed in North Africa or sub-Saharan. Like it'll be a different approach. And the nice thing about the DCDN stuff is that there's a much lower barrier to entry. So I think it's pretty compelling from that perspective.
Yeah. Another question I hear, if you look at the graphs, you saw an exponential growth in CDN traffic in general, and still a relatively low number in DCDN. Relatively, the DCDN grows faster than regular CDN. Is that the assumption?
Yes, it does grow a lot faster, but
in absolute numbers, it's way different.
Yeah, 115 exabytes compared to I think 12,800 exabytes. Like it's one and a bit % by the end of the period. I think now it's something like 0.06. Okay. So it's very small, but it is growing quickly. But the background context is just that the amount of video that people want to watch is just always ticking upwards, and it's not slowing down, and it's already a problem for some of these incumbent CDNs. So yeah, a few of them will be very interested in trying to offload some of that traffic via a DCDN option, I think.
Good. It's just more technical question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but a question here: how does DCDN stack up when it comes to latency?
So there's a few like actual functioning systems. So there's AOZ dot. I'm pretty sure it's tube, and what it is it just looks like YouTube, and that's using WebRTC, and that one is it's just pure VOD, and the answer there is that it's very small, but you click on it and it functions like YouTube, and they have these weird ad insertions that are paid for via cryptocurrency. But as a technology, like that's already live and it works, and you wouldn't really notice that it was DCDN from the sort of consumer, the customer view. The live streaming stuff, well, the pure WebRTC crowd will they're quite happy to tell you how impressive their technologies are today. And given that so much of the DCDN workload, like nearly all of it currently, and I think that will be the case going forward, is using WebRTC, then the latency for live streaming should be very good. It should be better than our kind of traditional HLS and Dash options. But at the same time, those versions are moving towards lower latency delivery options anyway. So it's sort of six of one, half a dozen of the other to some extent.
Okay, the last question. Especially, we thought it's especially interesting for emerging markets. Asia saw specifically a high rise of in comparison to other continents. Let's put it that way. If you look at Africa specifically, a lot of CDNs are looking at it right now as the potential next market. What is your prediction there in terms of DCDN?
In Africa in particular, there's way less fixed line broadband delivery, so far fewer broadband homes, and that means that most I would say most of the consumption will happen on mobile, and to that end, in Western Europe or North America, your DCDN users are going to be accessing over fixed line, and those sort of networks are a lot more kind of open, I would say. So it's easier to do DCDN there. In markets where it's mobile first, you're reliant on the mobile network operators to implement these functions. But the sort of fact of the matter is that on the face of it, DCDN is part of this sort of edge computing trend, and you will not find an MNO that is not going to talk your arm off about their edge computing capabilities. So it should slot in those functions. But that's I think that's the biggest fundamental difference, is that the emerging markets are, I think at some point they will catch up on fixed line penetration. But the more comparable thing there will be things like fixed wireless access and sort of millimeter wave 5G and whatnot. And those are a bit different. It's a bit weird. But I think the deployment there has to be sort of led, or at least incentivized, by the MNOs. But I mean, you're seeing weird things already, like Dish and Helium. Like there's options for that.
Good. We do have a couple more questions, but time is running out. So we'll leave those there to answer by yourself, or we'll answer them later.
Lovely stuff.
Thanks, Alex, for the session. And
thank you very much, Mark.
We'll talk soon. Then we'll go on to the next one, and it will be me presenting about the CDN Alliance specifically. So let me get my presentation and share a little bit about the CDN Alliance. Good, CDN Alliance. I mean, everybody has heard a little bit about it so far. And this is really our official launch event. So we're going to talk a little bit about the why of the CDN Alliance. So why do we actually do all this? and why do we think this is actually needed. So really about the why. Simon Sinek, I'm not sure if you guys, if everybody knows them, but he's a famous speaker. And one of his sessions on TED, as a TED talk, was about the golden circle, and really zooming in on the actual why. And this is one of his famous things to say, that it's nearly not about what you buy from a person, but really about why he's doing it that you buy, and that you buy something because you believe in that particular person or that particular vision. So that we really wanted to zoom into the why here. So how it all began. So the CDN Alliance was I started, I had to look up the date, March 3, 2020, just pre-COVID, basically, when it all started. And it was a regular dinner with me and Thijs, specifically on just regularly catching up based on the event that was happening. And we were talking about, okay, how can we leverage our expertise and our knowledge in a better way than we do now? And along the way, we really looked, okay, how can we do some training, some certification capabilities in what we do? Because we really thought that was still a void in the CDN market. But along the way, we found out, like, we can do training, we can do certification, but who's going to believe us? Because there is no authority that actually says you can actually do certification, and if you're certified, you do it well. Another point here also, as part of it, is that we found out that there is basically no cohesion in the market. Every CDN is different, every setup is different, so there is no real cohesion that we can do within the market. So once we started talking about this, we found out that there are so many differences, there are so many things unclear in the market, and there is no real organization on top of it, an industry organization that is really managing the CDN industry. And that basically for us was really starting point with, okay, is there something there that we have not seen in the last decade? And both me and Thijs have a long history in CDN, where we really looked at, okay, what was happening here? So what we basically did is after the session, after the dinner we had, is we came back like, okay, what is this? Are we onto something, or is this are we chasing a ghost, so to speak? So we did research on the internet, figuring out, okay, how does the actual CDN industry organize itself? And we found out that there is basically nothing. In our back of our heads, we already knew somehow, but we really didn't look at it like that. So that's really for us was a starting point. Okay, we might be onto something, we need to verify this. And we started talking with a lot of people. So we did our research, and we talked with a lot of people, just understanding, okay, what are things that you see? Are we right? Are we wrong? Do people have similar things that we see? Are there pains? Are there needs? Are there challenges? And more when we talk with other people, people got feedback, we use that feedback to talk with others. And along the way, we found out more and more about the different pains and needs and challenges within the market. So after a number of different talks, also doing eventually an industry questionnaire to really quantify typical challenges that we saw, we really figured out, okay, we really need to get this going. So we tried to figure out, okay, how do we need to do it? In what way do we need to do it the right way in order to launch? And then we had the outages of Akamai and Fastly and Cloudflare in June and July. And that for us was basically the starting sign. Okay, this is really the sign that we really need to get going. And basically that was the starting sign for us to start on September 1st, officially launching the CDN Alliance. Now, what we did as part of it is really identifying challenges. So one of the biggest challenges that we found out is actually the challenge that a lot of people, and us included in the beginning, that the CDN industry does not have a problem. And just by talking with a lot of people, and again, findings that we found, putting them back to other people for verification, really made people also aware, like, hey, actually there are more challenges than we initially thought. Actually, we had a number of different aha moments for different people, and I know one specific one where I said, yeah, there is no industry association like other industries for the CDN market, and he's like, no. I said, no. And he really looked on the internet. Is there nothing? There is nothing. And this is a well-known person in the market that really has not really thought about that in detail. So to capture the challenges was very difficult because everybody had a different view on how a challenge is perceived. But by talking with a lot of people, we were really able to identify the different challenges that we are. And we try to put those into, to simplify those, let's put it that way, for other people to understand. Because everybody has a different mindset and view and challenge that they have. So we try to really group them. And also we needed to define, okay, where is the actual challenge applicable, right? Is this a free industry problem, or is this more a problem of that particular corporation or organization, or is it even more on a personal level? And that's basically where we found out that there are 3 groups of challenges that we have discovered along the way. And as you can see, this is only a subset of all the challenges that we found along the way. And there's quite a number of different challenges, and a number of them are pretty well known. Some of them are a little less known. And those are actually the main challenges that we see. And of course, those, if you zoom in on those, you actually discover a lot more detailed specific challenges. But there are 3 types of groupings that we have done. So one is industry challenges, and industry challenges are really challenges that we only as an industry can solve, right? If we work together as an ecosystem, if we work together as an industry, we can solve these challenges. If we don't organize ourselves as an industry, we will not be able to change those. So those are typical industry challenges. Another one is corporate challenges. So corporate challenges are challenges that we see happening with different groups of organizations where they reinvent the same wheel. This is very common that we saw with all the different interviews that we did with different people, is that they all have the same type of challenges. They try to solve them on their own, in silo, right? Everybody has their own silo in solving them, where we think if we would put all those people together in one single room, solve it together, and then make use of it as an industry, this would actually help the industry move faster, move quicker, more cost effective, and we can focus on other stuff that is more important as an industry instead of reinventing the wheel. And the last group that we defined are individual challenges that we found out that are on an individual level, on a personal level, that everybody copes with if you're in the CDN industry. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of each of those groups, just to give you an indication of what kind of challenges there are. So for industry, we have standardization. Now, bottom line for the CDN industry itself does not have any standards. Yes, the CDN industry is built based on standards, open standards or web standards, etc. But itself, as an industry, it does not have any standards. There are some initiatives coming now in that area, but as an industry itself, it does not have any standards. And actually, if you look at the word standards, standards is a 1 and 0, right? It can only be 1 or 0. The real look we have right now is really more looking at the normalization. So really making sure that at least we have a set of agreements instead of a yes/no. Even if we do that, that's already a win. So even though we call it standardization, the first focus that we have as an industry is really look at normalization as a first step. Now, standardization seems like an ugly word in CDN space. What we actually see is when we talk with our people, we use the word standardization, people say, oh, that's commoditization, because that's typically what they see. But we have a number of different examples already where we think standardization can certainly be done without impacting any potential for commoditization. And this is very simple. It's not just technology, but it's also in terms of interoperability, but also in definitions, right? If we just look at purely definitions, we're not looking at the technology side, we're not looking at the interoperability side, but just in definitions itself, getting normalization or eventually standardization in definitions within the CDN space itself would already be a big win because it's not there. And this has actually been identified in talks with other people, not just by ourselves. We verified it with different people, but people came actually with us. This needs to be done. Another one is regulation. Now, regulation is, of course, a very not popular topic, let's put it that way. And years back, regulation and CDN were not two words that would actually be used in one sentence. But what we already hear is that the first discussions of regulation on the CDN side are actually started. This is already happening in the cloud area. The first steps in the CDN space are happening as well. So it is time to really start thinking about the impact of regulation and how we can do this the right way. Just to give an example, when we had outages of Akamai and Cloudflare and Fastly, there was a discussion ongoing about, okay, do we need to see CDNs as critical infrastructure? And with that, the question came, do we need to look at regulation at some point? Because it will be seen as critical infrastructure. Now, luckily, after July, there were no outages anymore, but you could imagine that if we would keep on having outages as an industry, this could actually trigger policymakers to really look at potential regulation of CDN space. So that is something we really have to be careful about. And if we would have such a chain event again, this could be potentially happening. We should not close our eyes to this. Regulation is also not always a bad thing to happen for an industry, right? There are a lot of examples as well for industry that went into regulation, or at least had some sort of regulation in some degree, that actually benefited from regulations. So regulations is not always a negative thing to have. It's actually a validation that you're important as an industry. So don't always look at regulation as a bad thing, but we do need to take a closer look at it. And what we absolutely need to do is we need to be a voice. We need a voice within the industry, as a voice, as an industry, before it is being regulated. So if the industry is being regulated at some degree, and we have no voice about how that should be done or how it could be done, there's no way that we can influence and help them understand on the regulation side to do it in a way that is beneficial for the industry. So the reason here is really make sure that we get this going before this happens, so we can mold it in a way that we as an industry benefit from it, and it's not being used against us in the end. Now, if you look at the corporate side of things, another one is privacy. Now, everybody is known with GDPR, and we heard multiple times from different interviews that privacy is a concern. It's already a big topic in general, and it's becoming bigger, right? There are more and more countries looking at legislation around privacy, GDPR-like types of legislation, and that is actually impacting the CDNs. Because looking at this legislation and what kind of impact this has on users of a CDN actually is very time consuming. It's very costly and it needs a lot of expertise. And with the growing use of these kind of privacy laws across the world globally, this could actually have a very significant impact on the CDN industry if we don't do this well. And this is seen already by a number of different CDNs as a potential threat. And the thing is, so far, so if you look at GDPR, CCPA, and all kinds of other types of privacy regulations, CDNs has always been last in line, right? So the legislation has been there, and CDNs just had to comply. And the reason is because, again, here, there is no voice. We were not able, as an industry, to make sure that GDPR, that CCPA, or any other legislation that is coming, to be embedded in a way that it's easier workable for CDNs to work with. And whether this is a public CDN, whether this is a private CDN, it doesn't matter. But in general, there is no voice. There is no voice that is able to talk with a public body and say, hey, you need to do it this and this and this way. That's better for us, makes it easier, and you can still do what you want to do. Now we're always last in line. Another problem which we didn't really think about, but what came across from different companies is vacancies. So a very big problem, what we found out is that a lot of the companies in the industry have issues finding the right people. And this is actually a big issue. We hear it's one of the most heard questions that we got from people, from the people we talked with. That filling vacancies is a big issue. And one of the issues here is where to look for the right candidates, right? So CDN is a very specific area. So where do you find your candidates? Another thing is, what expertise levels do they need, right? There is no certification for CDN. There's no way how you can say this is a good CDN engineer or is not. So this is a point of concern to those companies to really look at this. Okay, how can we do this in a better way? And this is really an issue for them. And the same is, how do they train people, right? So it takes time to train people, especially in the CDN space, which is very, very specific. So now this is really done by holding hands and doing internal training, which is also costing a lot of time and effort from existing employees. And the reason here is there is no training material available. We actually got questions from multiple organizations already, like, could you just create training material for us so we can actually have the material available? Because for us, it doesn't make sense to create the material, but if the material is available, we could actually do this. So this is certainly a problem that we didn't identify, but really came across. Now, on the individual side, a big issue is finding the right information. So if you want to look for any information on the CDN side, Google is your best friend. There is no starting point where you can find information out there. So that's a big issue for, we heard from a lot of people, that finding the right information is difficult. A lot of information that is available is not independent and cannot be verified. So they have to assume things on whether the information is correct or not. What we also found out is that a lot of people would love to validate or ask questions somewhere to, instead of searching it themselves, being able to ask questions for it. And last but not least, a lot of people just don't know where to look, but they at least need to have a starting point. And this is certainly an issue that with a lot of people, finding the right information in general is difficult within this space. Another one they found out is networking. So if you look at people in general, we call them circles. People have their own circles on how they have contacts with, and they hardly get out of their circles with new people. So getting in touch with other people in the CDN space is very difficult, and there's just no capability of doing so. Whether this is people in areas of interest, so things that are interesting in terms of the CDN space, or on a geolocation, so really in the neighborhood or in the same country or the same region, it's very difficult to find the right people because there's no location, no place where you can actually meet with each other. And what we also found out, a lot of people love to discuss about CDN. When we get engaged with somebody who's really passionate about CDN, we could talk with hours and hours with this person because they would love to talk about CDN. The problem is there is no platform to do this. And what we also found out that a lot of people would like to share experiences, share knowledge, etc. And we believe that sharing is multiplying, and this actually is lacking right now in the CDN industry because there is no access to connect and there's no capability to share. And this is something we found out as well from the individuals. So those are a couple of challenges that, just to give you a highlight, and again, this is just a very small subset of all the different challenges that we already found, but just to give you an indication of what kind of challenges we are looking at. Now, if you look at the CDN Alliance right now, so the founding phase we've done, right? So we officially founded, legally incorporated on April 1st, on April Fool's Day. It's not a joke, but we really launched on April 1st, and September 1st we made our public appearance, and we're now currently in the startup phase, and that means that we're really gearing up the organization, gearing up people, getting the first members on board, getting the activities running, etc. And we're gearing up for the acceleration phase, which will happen in 2022. Where we really get into public appearances, started doing lobbying, work with partners, other organizations, etc. So that's where we're going to. Now, if you look at our mission, and again, this is really the why again, and we've been chewing on this mission for a while, actually, before we finally got to this one, and including help from other people giving feedback on this. But our mission is really being an independent nonprofit organization with the goal to connect, support, and represent the global CDN industry and CDN community. And if I break it down, independent and nonprofit for a lot of people is important. This is something we found out during the interviews as well. That being independent and being absolutely independent is very important. Even got people saying that if we would start with a number of different main players, they would never join because then we would never be independent again. So we really decided to be really independent and really make sure that we're not related to any other player in the industry. So we can really play an independent role. Apart from that, we're really non-profit, meaning everything we do is really for the industry. It doesn't have a commercial goal. It's really making sure that the industry moves forward. Now, the second part of our mission is really about for whom we do it, right? So we call it the global CDN industry and CDN community. So global meaning we focus on the global CDN industry. We don't on a specific region. We want to make sure that we include the whole global industry as part of it. And we focus on the community as well. So in industry and the community. The community are really the people within the CDN industry, so on a personal level. And the other part is the industry, and those are really the organizations, the organizations and the companies that are in the industry. And what's important here is if you look at the industry itself, we focus on the full CDN spectrum, meaning bit delivery, dynamic delivery, media delivery, security, and edge. So the full spectrum of CDN services we really want to cover within the CDN Alliance. Now, who do we see as CDN industry members? And this is already just to give an indication on how people think about naming things. If we would ask different people about what the CDN industry actually is, I would get different answers. So we define the CDN industry, in our opinion, as 4 different groups of organizations that we think belong to the industry. So the first are the CDN service providers. So those are companies that market and sell CDN services. So those are the typical CDN players that we all know, but also their resellers, their channel partners, but also multi-CDN players. So anyone that markets and sells CDN services, whether you own a network or not. The second part of companies that we define as being CDN industry is what we call CDN technology providers. And those are companies that develop CDN technology and key components to build CDNs. So this is related to hardware, software, data, for instance, GIP databases and that kind of stuff, but also services like monitoring services and all kinds of other services that you use. So any technology or key components that you use to build CDNs. The third group is what we call CDN ecosystem players. And CDN ecosystem players are companies that do not market or sell CDN services. They do not develop technology or key components, but they have a place in the ecosystem. Simple as ISPs, carriers, data centers, exchanges, but also system integrators. So anyone, we call them the glue and the oil of the ecosystem to make sure that things work. The fourth group is what we call CDN industry players. And those are companies that either use CDN service providers, so the customers of CDN service providers, or customers that are using CDN technology providers to build their own CDNs. And this could be typical content providers, but also ISPs that build their own CDNs. Now, of course, a company can be in 1, 2, or 3 different segments. This is just to highlight what kind of different groups we actually represent as part of what we call the CDN industry. Now, if you look at what we do, we focus really on 2 types of memberships as part of what we do with the CDN Alliance. We have what we call industry members and community members. Now, community members is everybody on a personal level. So everybody can become part of our community. This is free. There is no cost involved. Everybody can do this, and you can benefit from all the benefits that we offer to our community members. The other part is what we call industry members. So industry members are companies that are in the CDN industry and play a role there. And these as a company can become member of the CDN Alliance. Of course, there's a cost involved of becoming a member. But as an organization, you can become a member there. Now, of course, there are people that are part of the community and also work at one of those industry members. And those are what we call corporate members. And those members specifically have special capabilities because the industry members actually pay for a part of the capabilities that are available. So community members do have capabilities. However, corporate members do have special capabilities, additional capabilities, because industry members pay for them. Now, the next part is what we call really what we do, which is the connect, support, and represent part. Now, connect is very simple. This is really about connecting everybody, right? This is connecting people, right? Connecting our community. So making sure people can connect with other people digitally, physically, in all kinds of different ways. We also do the same on the industry side. So we connect industry companies with each other to work on different topics, to connect with each other, etc., etc. We also connect the industry with the community. Just to give you a few examples, one of the things that we will be working on is, for instance, the job board. Again, this is a need that we see, but by offering this both to the community as well as the industry, we're actually able to really connect the community and the industry. And there are more of those capabilities out there. Another part of this is when we work on challenges, you already mentioned challenges on industry, corporate, and individual. The challenge that we want to work on, we don't want to work them only from an industry perspective, so only for companies. We also want to involve the community as part of it. And this is important because we believe that there's a lot of expertise and capabilities within the actual community, including freelancers, independents, etc. So we want to make sure that these are involved in solving the challenges that we have as an industry. The support part is really about our activities that we want to do. And all activities that we do, whether this is events, research, knowledge sessions, working on working groups, etc., etc. It's all important that it's initiated. We can initiate those, but it needs to be driven by our members. So both our community members as well as our industry members. It needs to support our mission. Everything we do, we look at our mission and that, and it needs to benefit our members. because that's what we want to do. Now, the last part is the represent part, and the represent part is really about us being the face and the voice of the industry. And now that the CDN Alliance is there, the industry now at least has a face where people can actually come to and talk to. Before this, there was no possibility for anyone else to talk with the CDN industry. The other part is the voice part, and the voice part is really us voicing our opinion as an industry, what we think is best for the industry, but also be a partner to talk with, for instance, in terms of legislation and other legal capabilities that are needed, but also in relation to, for instance, to the press, etc., etc. So really making sure that we can make ourselves known and make sure that our importance as an industry is known to the outer world. Now, of course, we would like you to join, and we do this, but what we also do is expanding our crew. So in the meantime, we have a lot of people that wanted to help. So we already have another 10 people that are joining our crew. We will invite those, we will introduce those in the next couple of weeks. But our team is growing. So if you're interested as part of the crew, feel free to reach out to us. We're still looking at additional people. But not only crew, we're also looking at additional community members and additional industry members. Now, why do industry members join? I'm not going to read all of those, but just to give an indication of what kind of reasons are why industry members join. So I would say join us, stay informed. If you've not registered yet as a community member or as an industry member or our newsletter or whatever, follow us on LinkedIn. Feel free to contact us at any time and join us on our mission. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to invite the next speaker to the scene, Stephan.
Yeah, hi there, Mark.
I'm giving the floor to you, so you can give your presentation about what you want to tell.
All right, let me just quickly share my screen then. All right, good evening, everybody. I think it's probably for most of us evening in Europe. Thanks, Mark, and the rest of the Alliance here for having me here. So what I wanted to do is just dive into some of the topics which some of you might be familiar with and frequently work with, and others might just always wonder why the stuff doesn't really happen like it was planned to. And I think what we have in the CDN industry is that we have a vertical delivery chain where there's just very little vertical integration between the players actually responsible for delivering that traffic and the content to the end users. And I just wanted to shed some light on a specific interconnect point between, say, the physical CDN and the ISP, who then connects to the end users, and what actually typically is discussed there and what can go wrong and where it goes wrong, and just a couple of examples from real life here. So I'm just, yeah. So focus areas in that interconnect area between the CDN and an ISPs are typically two elements. The one is actually focusing on capacity. That's typically being negotiated. And the second is localization. So how can you actually specifically in larger networks make sure that the traffic is handed over close to the end users? And let me just highlight a couple of items which need to be considered there. So when you discuss capacity, there's obviously always a trade-off between utilization and headroom. So if you want to utilize your investments, you typically aim for pretty high utilization. But if you want to be able to sell also for large events, then you need headroom there. And actually between the CDN and the operator, there might be conflicting priorities. So sometimes the CDN just wants more headroom, but then the operator says, well, I don't see a lot of traffic from you. Why should I actually invest a terabit of capacity just connecting you? And that is something to be negotiated and discussed. And I think a complexity adding to that is what we currently see is that a specific content source now might actually arrive in an ISP's network from multiple CDNs. And if this is very volatile, so if the content provider himself is playing, say, very active load balancing here, that actually might end up with very underutilized interconnects with CDNs, because the traffic one day comes over one CDN and the same type of traffic the next day just comes somewhere else. So it actually is a bit of a challenge for capacity planning. Then there's another element. If you have underdimensioned or even not existing interconnects with an ISP, then you typically overflow via indirects, so peers, transit, exchanges, and well, most of them actually have a commercial element attached to it. And if they are not well planned with capacity, then it might also affect unrelated services. And we see a lot of events recently, specifically live events, reaching levels which are unprecedented, and that actually might, yeah, it's difficult to plan capacity for that. Well, one of the elements which typically are added in a discussion are also caches. Here again, we talk about headroom and utilization, but we also need to negotiate, obviously, who delivers space and power. Cache fill is always an item which need to be considered. Is actually sufficient connectivity to all the off-net origins which need to be fed for that cache fill. And also one of the elements which we think as an industry need to face in the future is, say, resilience and redundancy. Typically a cache is not redundant, but if it fails in a location, where does the traffic then come from? So I think the failover concepts are currently typically designed very isolated from each other. So that's actually the main, say, focus areas you would have when you discuss capacity at an interconnect. Another element is localization. Typically, both players want to deliver traffic close to the end user. That minimizes round-trip delay typically. It also avoids unnecessary backhaul, and by that actually can reduce the load on the backbone of the ISP. And what you also want to do is keep the profiles stable, because, well, if you localize and have a lot of volatility in the localization, then actually the backbone can't really be utilized at a high level. So you need to have redundant capacity everywhere. And I'll show you an example on how that can fail. Good, actually, after that summary, let me just quickly come to a couple of real-life examples here. So capacity challenges typically are, well, if you are able to have a joint planning session and transparent parameters, then you can jointly actually reduce the investment needs for both parties and also improve the resilience of the network. We do see a trend, but there's a lot of buzz about it, but over time it actually happens that there is a trend to the edge. So specifically in larger networks, most of the CDNs are willing and pushing to deploy in multiple locations serving the same network. And once you are in that situation, you have a localization challenge, obviously, because at every user request, you need to decide which server cluster serves that user best. So I think there are a couple of benefits with that trend to the edge deployment. One, typically it's good for consumer experience because you deliver it closer and typically reduce your response times. It also is good for the traffic distribution costs, specifically on the ISP's network, because it doesn't really need to carry the traffic around on the backbone. But there are a couple of challenges with it. The one is, well, if you deploy dedicated, you need more headroom. So the the rule of big numbers doesn't apply for small caches or small deployments. And therefore, you typically over-invest a bit when you go deeper into an edge. Failover concepts are typically very poorly aligned. So an edge deployment would be a single instance. If that fails, you still need to have sufficient backbone capacity available to carry that traffic from another location. But which other location is chosen, that actually typically is totally unexpectable or unpredictable from the ISP's perspective. And if we look at it, an edge deployment will over time lead to a situation where the backbone is not built, capacity-wise not built anymore to carry the entire traffic for that region from a remote location. So it needs to be aligned at one point in time. Currently, most of the backbones are still, say, over-engineered, and they would easily cover that. But looking 5 years ahead, I don't see that happening anymore. And then localization and stability, the more you get to the edge, just become key requirements. So it's not we can't apply the best effort approach, which we have seen over the past years going forward for that. Good. Here is a good example. So this is real life, just like 4 weeks old, or actually a couple of days old, looking back 4 weeks. So that is actually traffic, the relative traffic distribution of a given CDN into a European operator. And the color coding here is, well, each color is a different origin or CDN server cluster region. And this was traffic actually going into a specific region of that ISP. So say North Rhine-Westphalia. And then traffic was coming from, well, yellow is really the same region. And all the other colors are different, but remote server cluster regions. So what you see is this gray one here was in the play for most of the time, but then failed for 2 days. Then there was another purple one here kicking in for about a week or two, but then disappeared again. So if you see actually traffic coming into your network from so many different locations, at one point you just need to maintain full capacity on your backbone to serve that specific region from elsewhere, because there's just no prediction, no way to predict where the traffic will come from tomorrow. And here you see at one point here, even for an entire week, there was nearly no traffic coming from the original region here, although there is sufficient server capacity installed and connected with that CDN. So localization very often fails here. A couple of other localization challenges, just to make sure that everybody understands what we talk about here. So if you have multiple server clusters available for that network, all actually holding the required catalog, if a user request arrives at your CDN or at your DNS answer, you need to decide which server cluster you allocate. And then obviously you would have different, well, hop count, kilometer distance, even capacity and utilization available between the different server clusters in that individual user here. And there can be a metric calculated for all of these parameters, which help you to select the right server cluster. So that is actually what we typically call utilization here in the CDN. But currently there are a couple of workarounds to do that, because most of the CDNs have no way to look into an ISP network. So the easiest is Anycast. I just tell the network I can serve everything from everywhere. Doesn't really scale. You need to hold catalog everywhere. So that is not a great solution. Then sometimes CDNs and ISPs negotiate that they dedicate DNS resolvers per region. It's quite some configuration needed. DNSs also have a failover location. So therefore there's a lot of, I have examples for that, how that actually can fail. Larger CDNs do permanent round-trip measurements. There are also issues with that, specifically that they don't really know how the subnets or IP addresses are allocated within the ISP's network, because they typically only get the aggregates communicated. Then a lot of CDNs buy external geo IP data. I have a couple of examples how that can fail. Yeah, and then what we propose is actually having an automated and real-time data exchange between an ISP's network and the CDN to really help them localize on all the relevant parameters like network distance, capacity, and utilization. So now I can give you a couple of nice examples. So using DNS resolvers, the good thing is you only need to monitor a couple of addresses. That's easy. Typically, these locations are fairly stable. The addresses don't really change very often. And you don't need to have a specific protocol element like ECS in that mix. Also saves load on the DNS resolvers of the ISP. But we actually see that DNS resolvers are not that strictly configured very often. The fallback location can be very far off. And that solution doesn't really work for DNS over HTTPS. So Google DNS, Cloudflare DNS, and a lot of smart TVs and IoTs which have a hard-coded DNS in the system also would not be supported by that. So don't be surprised if your smart TV users just can't be localized with that. So here are two nice examples. So the first one is actually, there was a mobile network in Europe, and they had, well, probably from 10 years ago, had configured their DNSs on a round-robin load balancing. I think that's the best idea to really confuse the CDN. So the CDN was just sending the traffic throughout the country. So what you see here is again the, say, handover server clusters of that CDN for a specific region. It was totally mixed up here. After that actually had been cleared up, that traffic location or localization actually became stable. The example down here, that is, but for whatever reason, an ISP had allocated a remote DNS resolver to a specific BNG in a specific town in the network. So that traffic then from one CDN who focused on that DNS localization was delivered from a remote location. Well, that can easily, once it's detected, and most networks can't even detect it, but once that is detected, it can be reconfigured. But in most networks, you don't have that daily, you don't have that daily force reconnect anymore on DSL. So that sometimes takes a couple of months. So this needed here more than 30 days to age out after it was corrected, actually. And then the traffic became local. I have another example, and I think then I'm finished. I'm already running a bit over time here. Sorry. If you buy geolocation from external databases or run your own, well, the good thing is databases are typically broadly available. It's pretty straightforward, and most people think it works. And you don't really need to engage with an ISP or between CDN and ISP because that data is available somewhere. There are a couple of things to consider. The one is geo distance doesn't equal network distance. Also, if you have a subnet like a /14, it's very likely that that /14 is actually cut in or chopped in a lot of pieces within the ISP's network. So it might actually be spread over the entire country, and then you still don't know even how it is chopped to which small pieces. Typically your data set is not really good there. You also have an update delay. If IP addresses are reformed within the ISP's network, you don't get immediate responses there or updates. A very important thing, it's very often inaccurate and you have no way to know. So you just rely on something which you can't really validate. It is not capacity utilization aware of most of the localizations here. And another thing, it doesn't, or it ignores the round trip delay. or round-trip realities. So you assume a symmetrical path, which in most cases is not the case. So I have a couple of fails for you to show. So the first one here is, again, typical logic. This is traffic delivered into a specific BNG and then you have the colors here. Well, that is actually from a remote server cluster delivered into 3 different BNGs here. And you see what happens. This is traffic which shouldn't exist because it comes from remote, but it just pops up here and needs about 2 weeks to then go away anymore. And what happened here is that ISP had reformed IP addresses to another location, and it took the geo IP provider 2 weeks to learn that new location. So it's not a massive fail, but just be aware that there is just not a real-time update on that. And 2 weeks is already pretty quick. Sometimes we actually see like months on months where the geo IP provider would not recognize it. And another is also like geo distance doesn't equal network distance. So here from a CDN, which really runs a pretty good geo IP based localization, but that is actually Hanover in Germany, which happens to be in the middle between 3 different regions. And from a geo distance, specifically because there was a German inner German border once, well, the network distance really doesn't equal geo distance here. And therefore they are falsely serving that region from remote locations as well, just because they are measuring on geo and not on network distance here. And the third fail, that is actually the symmetrical path assumption. So this is actually happening just a week ago. And you see from a large CDN into an ISP, and that is for Halb 1 in Germany, so north of Stuttgart. 100% of that traffic is served from Frankfurt, which is, well, one of the best options you can take. But the outbound path or outbound routing of that network operator here delivers all of that traffic to that CDN back in Munich. So what happens is your round trip delay gets totally destroyed, and you have to carry, as a CDN, have to carry the traffic back over your backbone. So it really takes a scenic route through southern Germany here. So I think it's a very important element to keep in mind. There are typically no symmetrical paths in the internet. Yeah, and then actually what we propose is do actually get in contact with the ISP, and the ISPs also should spend effort on looking into how traffic is currently distributing, and then also what can they make available to the CDN to help them in the localization, to actually avoid all of these fails which happen in real life. All right, so that's it for me.
Thank you, Stephan. Very, very interesting. Really good comments from the chat as well. One question I have here is there a way to quantify that, let's say, we do it in the right way, right? Assuming what the benefits would be. Is there being research in what kind of benefits this gives in whatever latency or traffic being delivered better?
I think that there are 2 KPIs to keep in mind. The one is latency, the second is backbone load. And for the latency, it really depends on the geographical spread of the network. So if you take, for instance, Germany, well, the maximum you can save is about 6 to 8 milliseconds one way. So round trip could be about 50 milliseconds you could save, just because the country is not bigger. But if you look at Australia or Canada, US, if you really have a nationwide network there and you deliver it from the wrong location, that can be heavy. Or Africa, which typically is served from Dubai or Europe. Well, if you had a local cache and it's just not used, then this also is a fail. So then we talk about tens and hundreds of milliseconds sometimes. And capacity-wise, what we see is, even in well-organized CDN networks, we see mismatches of about 15 to 25%. So if you have a terabit of traffic from a CDN, you are typically carrying about 200 to 300 gigabit of traffic on your backbone, which could be avoided if you localize the traffic better. So that's what we typically see there.
Good, good. Then the last question. Basically, you're saying, because you say more delivery in the edge, but there's a risk that there's not delivery and not enough capacity in the backbone in case of whatever failure of the edge. What are typical solutions to make that eventually work? Knowing that eventually at some point we need to push more stuff to the edge just to keep the capacity going.
I think we need to align failover concept. So if I have a single node as a cache, then I need to have a failover from a remote location. But then I, as an ISP, need to make sure that I know which location will be triggered second. And then I build sufficient capacity from between these two locations so that traffic can be backhauled. And otherwise, we would need to install, say, redundant cache infrastructure. But one of the way needs to work. And currently, there's no alignment. As an ISP, I would not even know what is the second choice of my CDN provider. Or of that CDN which I interconnect. I think it's not rocket science. It just needs alignment, and it also needs the respective configuration.
Yeah, so it's really about handshakes that we need to establish between the ISPs and CDNs, or basically any network with any network in that respect. Thanks, Stephan. Very interesting. I'm sure there are other questions popping up. In the meantime, I will. If you can close the presentation, I will give the floor to Adam.
Thank you.
Adam, are you there? Yes.
I am. Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you. I know you have very short, so I'll give it directly to you.
Thank you.
But I know you have interesting stuff to tell us.
Excellent. I will just stop my video. Hi, so I'm speaking on behalf of Greening and Streaming. We are another new not-for-profit organization. So our mission statement, as you can read there, we're basically stepping up to raise the awareness around the environmental issues of the streaming industry, to ask our members to spread best practice amongst themselves, and then act as a collective voice towards industry, to media and the public. So Greening of Streaming was founded principally by Dom Robinson, who's been in the sector for his working life, the last 20 years or so. And he's working for Ideas software company, and they're working in the streaming industry, providing bespoke software for video streaming. And they've kind of looked at the issue of sustainability and said, you know, we're burning a lot of power here. How can we do something about this? So it's gained traction, and they've decided that they'll set up Greening of Streaming as a completely standalone entity. So again, completely unaffiliated to anyone else. And because it's taking up time, I've stepped in to help them out as the executive director to get it off the ground. And the aim is to bring together members at all levels of the streaming industry, anyone who's involved in the supply chain across it, and to bring them together with the public and policymakers, and to act as a mouthpiece to the media to share what we're doing. Over the last years, obviously, it's a fairly new industry. So initially the focus was the performance. How can we make things quicker? Subsequently, the next stage is to focus on the price. How can we make it cheaper for people to get what they want? And so the next block is to raise the focus of the sustainability. Where there are many changes that the industry can make, and part of it is educating the public and ask them what changes will be acceptable. So why focus on streaming? Current estimates are that 3/4 of the traffic on the internet is streaming. It's currently assumed to be using 2 to 3% of global energy, which is broadly in line with the aviation industry. Obviously, the last year has seen a step change in how we're all consuming our streaming. So we've all been locked down at home. Streaming has changed our lives. We've been able to use it for entertainment. We've been able to use it to replace work meetings, doing what we're doing now with our Zoom calls. So it's a good thing, but a lot of the public aren't aware that there is still an impact. So currently, estimates are that an hour of streaming is the equivalent of driving a quarter of a mile in your car. So although we're not driving as far in the car, there is still an impact, and we need people to understand that. And it's only a matter of time till the industry is focused on. Obviously, over the last year, people have been starting to talk about cryptocurrency, and there's a lot of shared infrastructure. And at the moment, the public obviously seem to consider cryptocurrency with some suspicion. Not everyone's involved. They see banks of servers in China, or obviously that stopped in the last couple of weeks. But people haven't considered that their own impact of streaming. So it will become a focus, and we want to be there to explain to the public what the industry is doing about it. So Greening of Streaming is a not-for-profit company, and all monies received must be ploughed back into growing the business and extending its aims. We're members-led, so we've set up our first board, as it were, of founder members, and they are steering the organisation for the first year. At the end of the first year, we'll allow members to nominate, others step down, replace. But to start with, we needed some stability. So our founder members have got together and they're steering the goals for the first year. They've also agreed that the members must step up and deliver. So there's no greenwashing. Just being a member of Greening of Streaming doesn't absolve you of responsibility. And they've all pledged to share best practice where they can and ensure that we actually deliver in our goal of improving sustainability. And as a result of all the changes we make, Greening of Streaming will be communicating with the media and the public to explain what we're doing to improve sustainability within the industry. Currently, we've set up, so we only founded our launch in October. So we've set up our first working groups. The initial one was to create a lexicon working group. At the moment, there are many different ways of reporting. People are using different terminologies. People have different calculations. So we wanted to find a consistent way of reporting what the industry is doing. Our next working group is based on outreach. So it's canvassing members for questions for our parliamentary launch, which I'll come on to in a minute, and to engage their contacts, because we only win if we all win. So we need to sign up as many people as possible, and that way we can have a big impact on sustainability. Given that we're using up to 3% of global energy, a very small change in the way we work can make a big impact in terms of power savings. The next group that was agreed is going to be commissioning an academic paper, an independent academic paper, and we want to definitively understand how much power the industry is using and try and understand the current position so that any changes that we as a group make, we can actually measure the change that we're having, and sustainability can be measured and fed back. So part of what we're about is communication. And to that end, we've undertaken a formal launch at the UK Houses of Parliament on the 8th of December. So this is already booked up, and we're inviting our members to come along. And we're engaging with the MPs, and we're being sponsored by one of the MPs, and they'll host the meeting, as it were. And the idea is that because we're holding it on a parliamentary voting day, we should get a lot of footfall from other MPs who are interested. Obviously, it's very current with COP26 happening. So we'll be inviting MPs and also the press. We're working with a lobbying company, Political Intelligence, who hold lots of events. And they've already managed to get us impact with the British press. So we've been interviewed by a couple of the mainstream newspapers, and we've been interviewed by the BBC on one of their radio programs. So we're getting the message out of what we're about. At this stage, we're signing up members, And we're particularly grateful for Intel and Akamai, who from the outset have been very, very supportive and really enabled us to engage with many other companies. And I would welcome anyone to come and talk to us. And we're really interested in sharing best practice and trying to develop sustainability across the streaming industry. So if there are any questions, I would love to take them.
Hi, Adam. Thanks. I don't think there are questions. Let me double check.
That's okay.
Yeah, is it possible to know the source of the figures shown in the sustainable pitch? So there are figures mentioned.
So DIMPAC have we've been in touch with Dan Sheen from Bristol University.
Bristol University.
And he's affiliated with Bristol University, and he spoke at our launch event. And certainly he's involved in sustainability. I think with the BBC he did a big study for, and at this stage that's the figures that are being touted. But partly, you know, this is why we want to engage with get our own proper academic study to definitively identify what the streaming industry is using, and so that we can measure our impact.
Perfect. Good. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk soon for sure.
Thank you.
Then I would like to give the floor to Mike Gordon. Mike, are you there?
I am, Mark. I think you've stopped my video.
Let me put you on.
Not that anybody really wants to look at my face, but
And now you can.
there we go. Thank you, sir. It's great to be with you.
Thanks, Mike.
Great to be with you today.
Yes, thank you for joining us, especially on such short notice, being here. Just got to test because we're already on our time schedule. So head on, and can you tell a little bit about you and Deliver and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Mike Gordon. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Deliver. It's spelled with no vowels, so DLVR, but we pronounce it Deliver. And what we do is multi-CDN internet video measurement and optimization. Before Deliver, I was one of the founders and the chief strategy officer, pardon me, at Limelight Network. So I've been part of this CDN industry and the streaming industry for, gosh, 20 plus years now.
A veteran, if you call it, right? Or dinosaur, how you want to call it.
I consider myself one of the OG CDN folks.
Very good. So, I mean, you've been in CDN and now multi-CDN for a long time. So if you look at, specifically, if you look at the multi-CDN part specifically, what are typical challenges you run into running or making multi-CDN available in the first place, but also running multi-CDN? So what are challenges that you typically bump into?
Sure. So, of course, the reason folks implement multi-CDN is partly to avoid outages, which only happen every year or two per CDN. But if you're using 3 or 4 CDNs, that could affect you once or twice a year. But as soon as they've implemented multi-CDN, the next step is to find a way to use multiple CDNs to improve user experience. You know, the research, the data on this is really clear. Even today, about 2/3 of users will report that they've experienced a buffering event over the last week. A third of them will say, I've experienced 2 or 3 or 4, and a fifth of them will say, I've experienced one over the last day. So buffering remains a problem for the simple reason that it interrupts the content experience. Just as the punchline is about to be delivered, or the goal is about to be scored, or the Michael Myers is about to stab Jamie Lee Curtis one more time, the video buffers, and it really disrupts the audience's viewing experience. And so once a streamer has implemented, a video streaming company has implemented multi-CDN, they will almost immediately start trying to use it to improve the quality of user experience. And that's when they begin to run into some real challenges. So, you know, there are challenges before you implement, while you're implementing, and after you implement. Before you implement, you have to provision multiple CDNs, deal with things like multiple shared secrets if you're using token-off, setting up origins for all the CDNs, keeping all those configurations in sync. And even if it's a small number of CDNs, 3 or 4, there's a lot of complexity to provisioning multiple CDNs. While you're using multiple CDNs, you've got to figure out how to measure user experience, how to feed back those measurements into your CDN selection decision-making process, and then figure out how to execute changing CDN decisions. And as Stephan was saying in the first presentation this morning, there's a real benefit to stability in how you configure CDNs. Volatility can be bad, but flexibility, particularly real-time flexibility, can be very beneficial if it helps you avoid buffering events. So we've got these contending objectives that we're trying to sort of play one off against the other, somehow factor it all into a decision and make that decision as fast as we can. And then, of course, after the fact, we have the challenge of understanding what happened and what results we achieved. And that really has to be applied to the full delivery stack. So to what extent, if there were problems, did they occur strictly in the ISP? Users on a mobile device, lots of other users join that same cell tower, and that affects the users who were already in flight in terms of their experience. Nothing any of us can do about that. Maybe not even the mobile network can do about that. It's just in the nature of fluctuating crowds, right? What happened on the CDN? Is there anything we can do about that to improve user experience? And then what happened upstream in the workflow? Maybe there were some issues caused by slow ad decisioning or origin issues or connections between origins and CDNs. It's really difficult when you talk to most companies in internet video streaming to collect all that data, somehow correlate it, somehow make it useful in anything like a executable time frame, and apply that in a systematic way to improving user experience. So what we see happen really commonly is internet video companies adopt multiple CDNs. They get the benefit of avoiding outages because when an outage does happen, you can make a change pretty quickly, but they really struggle to utilize multiple CDNs systematically to improve user experience.
Good, perfect. Then a little bit more a side topic, which also relates to multi-CDN is in Europe, the first discussions are happening on regulation. I mentioned in my presentation as well a little bit, but the first discussions of regulation for even video delivery are happening because we're getting very dependent on video delivery through the internet. Very simple, and not even for commercial services, but also for public services.
Sure.
Do you have these kind of discussions in the US as well? Because you have a much better focus on what's happening in the US versus what we know here in Europe.
We're not really seeing a lot of that yet in the US. We have been following Europe when it comes to regulation in a lot of areas related to the internet. A great example of this is privacy. GDPR came into effect first. A couple of years later, California, which is one state in the United States, made some changes, and now we're seeing other states and the federal government begin to look at privacy regulation. So we're a little behind Europe, I think, in general. We haven't seen a lot of activity around, other than sort of ISP-focused net neutrality regulations. We haven't seen a lot of activity regulating how CDNs and cloud services interact with ISPs, and how do we make sure that we keep the playing field level and fair to all participants. It does seem likely that that will be coming at some point. I think, just again, to call back to Stephan's presentation, the level of technical complexity that ISPs deal with and that you can get into when you begin to systematically address the problem of multiple CDNs interacting with multiple CDNs, and how do we interconnect and then manage traffic in a way that is best for users. I don't know if the regulators are going to really have a lot of luck trying, really grappling with that level of complexity. But we'll see. It'll be interesting. I think we can all agree that regulators never met a problem they didn't think they had a solution for. So
I think that is irrespective of Europe or US. I mean, that's
irrespective of where you are in the
board.
world, they seem to find a way to think they've got the answer. Not that they don't, because sometimes they do. Where would we be without, sort of food safety, for example, right?
Yeah, sure.
So there is an appropriate role for regulation, but I would caution everyone involved that the level of technical complexity here is going to make that challenging.
Yeah, exactly. Agree. Good. So knowing your background with Limelight, now Deliver, I've been in the CDN space for so long. If we look 5 years ahead, how will the CDN landscape look like?
Well, 5 years ahead,
It's long,
the first and most important thing we have to see is that users probably see no more buffering. At a minimum, they see a lot less buffering. And I know that buffering is not a 4 times per 20-minute television episode today like it was in 1999, but it still happens often. We all see it in our own experiences. And as we stream more and more video, we care more and more about the quality of that experience. And in fact, about half of users will tell researchers it's the #1 consideration when I'm making a decision in front of my connected TV, which video app am I going to watch some video on right now? So we have to fix that problem. I think the way the industry is going to fix it is in a couple of key ways. First of all, much more cooperation between ISPs and CDNs. And I think one of the stumbling blocks to that cooperation in the past has been different goals, different economic goals, different agendas, different technical capabilities. And we have to begin to either move past it or have a way of sort of sorting out, in Stephen's presentation, he talked about not wanting to use a lot of his backbone. Well, CDNs don't really care how much of the ISP's backbone they use at the end of the day. They care about how much load they can take and how much revenue they can generate. Not to be critical, but that's just in the nature of being a CDN. So, so we have to figure out ways to sort of bridge that gap. Deliver's done a lot of work on that, and you'll see some things from us over the upcoming time here that go directly to addressing that. And I think we have to move as an industry beyond the best effort approach that the CDN industry has really taken basically for the last 20 or 25 years to a guaranteed performance approach for at least the users that we have the ability to guarantee performance for. And if I can guarantee video quality for half the users, that's better than none. And the CDN industry grew up in the world of the web, where the only thing I could compare one website to was another. Internet video streaming is compared to pay television. And the pay television industry has done a great job of doing the two things that users care the most about when they sit down to watch some video. Start immediately. There isn't this 5 to 10 second pause after I select a program. When I change channels, I get the new channel right now, like within a second or less. And then the second thing the pay TV industry has done really well is not buffer. That concept doesn't even exist in pay television. So yeah, the satellite feed might go down once in a while. It's pretty rare. It does happen. We've all seen it happen. But gosh, the day in, day out question of whether the stream is going to freeze in the middle, the pay TV industry, whether we're talking cable or satellite or telco delivered pay TV, done a really, really good job of solving that. And that's what consumers now expect. Audiences expect that class of experience from their internet video experiences. So I think as an industry, if 5 years from now, we haven't at least approached that for the majority of users, I think there's going to be real issues, because we're going to be, instead of 20% of video being streamed on the internet versus watched on pay TV, we're going to double that, maybe triple that over the next 5 years. And we have to solve this problem as an industry.
Yeah, so we have to step it up, basically.
Yes, we do.
Very good.
Great, thanks, Mike. This is my last 20 years, by the way, not just of everybody who's watching this. I mean, look, I'm guilty as charged, right? But we have to recognize that audiences are at the front and center of what we do for a living, all of us, not just the people collecting 8 or 10 or 12 euros a month. We have to deliver on that promise. We have to do the job we've been asked to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike, for the time.
Well, thank you. I assume you will now resume control of this session and turn off my camera.
You can turn it off yourself. That's all right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I have one last thing to mention to everybody. That is a little announcement for the ones that have stayed on. And that is this one. So for the ones that are going to IBC in Amsterdam, 3 to 6 December, one, feel free to meet up with us as a board, or one of the members, or all of us. We will be there all 4 days. And we're gonna do a what we call CDN Alliance Connect. And the CDN Alliance Connect is really about CDN, drinks, and networking, in short, CDN. And we're going to do the first physical meetup there at IBC on Friday, December 3, from 6 to 9, right across the RAI, so right across the IBC hall. More information will soon be on the website, and the ones that are registered as us as a community member or our newsletter will get that information by email as well. So that will be the first physical meetup as a CDN Alliance Connect setup. And it's proudly sponsored by MPAW, Bioanalytics, 3Q, and IDs, who agreed to sponsor this event to make sure that we have a good time and we can really, really meet each other and connect as part of what we do. Thank you all for the event. Great to have you all here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time. And otherwise, I hope to see you all at the next event. Thank you. Bye-bye.